I don't know about you, but the end of March, when NCECA 24 in Richmond, Virginia happened, well, it does not feel like it was more than a month ago already. At most, it feels like maybe it was 2 weeks ago. But apparently the calendar does not lie, and here we are. A little over 1 month later, and clearly about darn time that I get this recording to all of you. A huge thanks to NCECA for co-producing this recording and for supporting podcasting in the Clay community. Also, a very big thank you to Cole Collier for running sound for the recording. Because let me tell you, recording in person with a room full of guests and a panel of people is a whole different ballgame than what I do by myself in my little room at home. And of course, thanks to all of you that came out to participate in this discussion at NCECA. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler for what I took away from this chat before we get into it all. It seems to me that it all comes down to relationships. And relationships are started by putting yourself in the room, whether physically, if possible, and hopefully local to you, or virtually, by showing up and engaging with each other. But before I start rambling on about that, let's just dive into my chat with Peter Beasecker and Louise Rosenfield on building relationships with collectors, right after a brief word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of The Maker's Playbook. The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a 2-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tanned white and black base colors, with a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com.
Without further ado, I'll give you the Maker's Playbook.
I want to acknowledge that Ben said this initiative started last year. Ben started this initiative, so big credit to Ben Carter, please. All right. And normally, if you were listening in your headphones, whatever. If you were listening at home to the podcast, this would be the time where I would say something like, we'll get right into this topic after a brief word from our sponsors. That would be a bit redundant today because one of them is sitting up here with me. So I'm just going to let these two fabulous people kick it off by introducing themselves. And the obvious segue is for Louise to go first.
I'm Louise Rosenfield, and I'm from Dallas, Texas. And I have been a student of ceramics since 1990-something. And during that period of time, as all students of ceramics do, I started buying my favorite pots, functional work, and eventually it turned into the Rosenfield collection, which is I can now use as a sponsor because I want people to know that this is a collection of currently 4,123 functional pots online, available for you to look at small images, but if you want to go to the image, then you can download high quality images and use them however you want without any attribution. You can use it for student assignments or for research or for just, making still videos out of. And it's rosenfieldcollection.com.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Ben and Rebecca. My name is Peter Beasecker. I teach at Syracuse University. Prior to Syracuse, I was at Southern Methodist University for 17 years, where Louise was one of my students. And to your point about your wonderful website, it has made me a rather lazy professor because I only have to go to one place now for my PowerPoints. They're fantastic. It's organized either by object or by artist. And it's so great to be able to show a student the foot of a pot or the rim. So thank you, Louise, for being thoughtful about that.
And this was one thing I failed in yesterday when I presented about photography, because I wanted to make the point, if you were there, that when we are talking about glare and we are talking about getting rid of glare or keeping it for the surface of the pot, I want you all to go to the rosenfieldcollection.com, because it's the perfect example of how different types of pots look different in the same lighting, in the same they're all photographed the same way, and you can see that, oh, this crystalline piece is going to reflect light differently than this wood-fired piece, and that's okay. But photography was yesterday. That's enough about that. Before we get ahead of ourselves, how did the two of you originally meet? Peter, you just alluded to it a little bit, but let's just dive a little deeper on it.
I'm an artsy, craftsy person. So, I crochet, I knit, I quilt. And of course, I took a pottery class at a local craft center. And my pottery teacher moved away, and I got a different pottery teacher, and I was a hand builder, and the different pottery teacher said, if you don't learn to throw on the wheel, I've got nothing for you. And I'm a very slow learner. It took me 6 weeks to learn how to center something. I mean, I tried really hard. By the end of that session, I could make, a little bowl, beginner bowls. Let's see, there's the salsa bowl, the cat bowl, we all know the series.
Shot glasses.
Yeah. So anyway, then that teacher decided to go to graduate school. And he said, I'll introduce you to somebody that I think is a really good teacher, Peter Beasecker. And luckily for me, my husband is a professor also, so at SMU. So the art department was really nice, and they let me sign up for an adult class once I got Peter's permission. Gotcha. And so I got to go to class. And he had to interview me first to see if I would fit in, and I guess he decided, okay. But I didn't make it easy for him.
Well, no, but you made it hard for all the other students because you set the bar. You set the bar very high. Louise was a student for 5 years. So I think anytime, for those of you who are educators out there, in a 5-year span of time, they're going to see you at your worst and at your best. And so for Louise to still hang in there with the classes I was very appreciative of that. But she really was the top student, always getting the work done on time and engaged in the critiques and so forth. So it was a pleasure having her in class, but I did have to kick her out because I had nothing left to teach her. And then she went on and taught raw materials for us at SMU.
Cool. So, Peter, had you worked with collectors before? Well, let me back up a little bit. I was going to ask you, Louise, how the collection came about. You alluded to it initially, but through a passion in ceramics, kind of on accident, or take it away.
So we have a story. All potters collect pots. I alluded to that. I had maybe gone to one NCECA and taken a workshop at Penland and, bought a couple of things here and there. And I guess I have to say it was more than a couple of things here and there because we had to build an extra set of shelves in our kitchen, and I had to install extra glass shelves in the bar for all the cups. And my husband was getting very frustrated. And, we had a workshop in town at a local craft center, and Judith Solomon was the invited artist. So there was a dinner, and the guests at the dinner were Peter, Judith, Margaret Meehan and Noah Simblist, who now live out here in this area, George Bose, who lives in Galveston, and my husband and me. And in the middle of dinner, we're all talking and having a good time. My husband stands up and says, "Okay, I just have to ask you all, when is this enough?" And Peter said, "Oh no, it's never enough. And besides that, you need to start putting this online. You need to have a collection. You need to have this properly photographed." And then through preceding conversations, he showed me books of some Chinese art and how that Chinese artists are often portrayed not just like we were doing at the time, where you see the profile of a pot, but they always showed you the foot, which for anybody who's concerned about that, you want to see more than the profile. You want to see the foot. You want to see what the inside looks like. And so that's how we started. And then later we made it a point to always find the artist's signature, also put it on there. And then, we share that with the Marx Project.
That's pretty much how it went. It was an eventful dinner. But things moved. But let's face it, the important thing, the kind of underlying story here is that anybody who does an adventure like Louise does, oftentimes, it brings in other family members. And David was a very important family member to get on board. And so with David kind of hearing our passion and our enthusiasm for this, I think he then sensed, okay, I cannot stop this train, but I can help give it some direction. And I don't know how successful he's been in that, but he's certainly been really supportive. And for those of you who know Louise, hopefully you're fortunate enough to know David as well, because he is behind the scenes, works a great deal for and with the collection.
I have to just ask pragmatically now that it's known as a collection. Is it still on all the shelves at home, or does it live other places?
Well, during this period of time, so first, we had to add shelves to the bar and shelving in the kitchen, and then we decided, let's just get a different house. So
it was my first thought.
I did not expect that answer.
So in the new house, I have a 40-foot long kind of closet that's 8 feet wide and has floor-to-ceiling shelving, and then at one end a photography setup, and that's not the things that are in the collection that are online are not the pots I currently use on a daily basis. They are the pots that have been used in our environment, that we have entertained, used, enjoyed, and now made room to have others. And so in our kitchen, living room, butler's pantry, other areas, there's probably still 1,000 downstairs, and this closet is upstairs. Functional work, which I'm passionate about, and anybody who wants to talk to me about it, I have a whole spiel about why you need functional art in your life. So I feel very strongly that selling that extra work is not in the cards. It will never be sold, and it ought to be used, because just sitting in those boxes in the closet is not really a good place for functional art. So I don't know, 2018 or something like that, I was talking with the director of the Everson, and she's, like other people have said, what are you going to do with your collection? So I said, well, I have this fantasy it's going to be used in a restaurant, and then it'll all be broken, and maybe the last piece standing will go in a museum or something with a story about this. Cool. And she said, I think the Everson could use a restaurant. And she started, partnered with the dean of the architecture school in Syracuse to have an international design competition for this restaurant. and it culminated in a symposium at the Everson, and then a contractor was selected, and it was really interesting and exciting for me to be part of the planning and part of the committee to pick. And it's almost finished because COVID, and 3 operators later, but about 400 pots are there now. And Garth Johnson, the curator of the Everson, who I'm sure lots of you know, has really done a great job of selecting those 400 works to be the first ones. So hopefully that'll open soon. And it's really exciting for me because I'm just following Peter all over the country. And because he moved from Southern Methodist University to Syracuse University. And the Everson is in Syracuse.
Convenient.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I had a moment of recognition as you were saying that normally people can't see me when we do the podcast, and I was just sitting here with my mouth like flies, and I was like, what? This is amazing. Do you feel, and this was a question, as Ben said, we're going to have Q&A at the end, and for anyone who's listened to the podcast, you also know that the people who are in the Maker's Playbook membership find out who I'm interviewing and then submit questions. So those are going to be woven in as well. And Jenna had asked kind of if it's difficult to approach collectors and galleries when it comes to functional versus sculptural or fine art. I think for myself even, I think ceramics is this tricky world of that we have this functional aspect, right? And sometimes that can be harder. I don't know. Either of your experiences. I'm not going to put the rest of my assumptions on that. I'm going to let Peter take it away.
I'm not quite sure where to take that. I've always made a utilitarian vessel, and that's been very much at the core of my making. I have done other things, but that is clearly the idea of use is sort of like the tuning fork for the work. And so it's always been exciting with Louise to know that this gets used. I mean, anybody who has been fortunate enough to be in Louise's home, everything gets used. And, as a maker, particularly one in academia, one of the things that, we are conscious of is when your work goes into a public collection, such as a museum, but you can guarantee it's never going to be used. So it's always a little bit of a pain. Of course it's great to have that acknowledgement, but to know that it's going into exile is something that isn't so great. And every now and then I remember delivering a piece to a smaller collector in Dallas. And it was one of these carriers that I had made, and he was anxiously awaiting me with a pedestal that he had made for it and a plexiglass top. And as soon as I set this piece down, out came the screw gun, and then when I saw him like 5 years later, he's like, oh, I haven't moved that. And that was kind of disheartening, that this thing that you pour a lot of energy into, the idea of use and community, and then it just doesn't happen. But obviously everything functions at a different level for every owner. And for that particular owner, just looking at it was enough. And I don't begrudge that. But it is kind of a different thing when it goes into a museum. But I do want to back up, if I might, to talk about the Everson for 1 second. When Louise and David put together that idea of the architectural competition, the Everson is a very unique building in that it is, I believe the New York Times said it was I.M. Pei's third most significant building. It was his first museum, and it's a quintessential Brutus architecture. And so it was bringing in an architect to have a conversation with this, much like we collaborate, whether we collaborate with chefs or whatever. And also what I thought was part of the genius of this competition is they didn't allow the major monster firms to apply. So it was only very, very small, edgy firms. And I believe out of the 5 finalists, I believe 2 were international. And it was exciting to be in town and be a part of that and to have that going on. It's beautiful.
This actually makes me want to take a couple steps further back even more to say how would either of you define either being a collector or a collection? Like, is there a definition of that? Does it matter? Does my growing collection of NCECA purchases count?
I think that we all have collections. It's like, and everybody here is thinking about what's going to happen to that stuff. And some people decide they're going to, sell a piece and it'll pay for their rent, or, they need to monetize it. And some people just want to keep it all and let the next generation decide what to do with it. And some people feel a little guilty about that. But, I don't know where all this stuff goes in the world, if it's including sculptural. I mean, I have concentrated on functional pieces, but sculpture pieces are the same way, unless we, bury them all outside in the woods, or, sneakily take them to the national park and hide them somewhere where maybe somebody will discover it. I don't know what happens to all this stuff.
Yeah. And if it is in the national park, someone's going to find it and say, oh, well, they needed this here because on the equinox, the sun hit this sculpture, and, who knows.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question, the difference between a collector and a collection. So when we think about collection, the word, curator comes to mind. And I think that that's a bit where Louise might deviate from a traditional collection that has just one point of view. I think with Louise, the unique thing is, function is the overarching parameter. But also, Louise, there's a part of you that also collects the person, the individual who maybe is at the beginning of their career, but Louise has a really good eye for people. And, when you do reach out and buy somebody's work and it's their first piece in a collection, it means a lot. It's a huge, huge boost of oftentimes a very needed one. And so that is also part of it, as I see it, Louise's role. And I think a lot of people in our field have benefited from that aspect of collecting.
That's a really good point and a beautiful segue to another question that I had submitted from our member Mary, who was asking, how does this even start? How does it, especially for a lot of the artists that are here, wondering, it might sound really attractive to have a collector buy your stuff. That can kind of feel like collector with a capital C, perhaps. Or how to connect with a gallery. A lot of people are thinking of like, how do I get this to work? I don't know if there's a backwards math of it, or if it's just a hope and a prayer and a Hail Mary, or...
When I first started buying functional ceramics, one time I came to my pottery class at SMU, and Peter said, "Oh, Louise, you've got to see this. I just got this teapot. Sam Chung made this teapot, and look at this thing. It's really cool." And he picked up the lid, and there was this very interesting, shape under the lid. And he said, "You know what? That gallery has more. You should get one." So I did. I, went online. I called up. This was before you could go online. I called the gallery. They had this other teapot. They sent it to me. And then I showed it to Peter, and he said, "Okay, you need to tell," it was by Sam Chung, you need to tell Sam Chung that you have his teapot and tell him what you think of it, that will be a very important thing to do. So next NCECA, I found Sam Chung in a bar.
It's NCECA. I mean, come on.
Yeah. And that's where he liked to hang out. So I found him and I introduced myself and I said, I have your teapot and I think it's the nicest teapot I own. It was the only one, but it was the nicest. It was beautiful. And I was able to talk about, what I liked about it and ask some questions about it. And, I was terrified. It was really intimidating for me to find this stranger and have this conversation. And, I think I made a good friend. And so I still buy his pots. And I guess this is, I don't want to say how many years ago. And yeah, it's a great to establish that relationship. And in fact, he had a sabbatical in Korea a couple of years ago. And while he was there, he was posting every place he went and stuff that he was seeing. And I saw something in the background and I texted him, say, that's really cool. What's there in the background? Can you help me get one of those? And so it was these beautiful donuts, big ceramic donuts. And they hung on the wall and they looked like the icing on a real donut, except for the glitter. It had some like rhinestones. I don't know. I don't vibe very much sculpture. This was a sculptural piece. And he said, well, this is an artist. He shows in New York. He's here in South Korea. I'll try and make a contact for you. And I said, okay, I know this is work for you. If he'll sell me a donut, then you pick one too, and we'll both have this donut. And now we both have a donut. And then Sam made me a box. So that I can protect the donut. So I have now one of his like cloud boxes for the donut. But I also this is what happens to me. This is how I buy something. I saw a Shalene Valenzuela rippled paper plate with an iconic 1950s blonde woman eating a donut. And so I bought this plate and put the donut on it, my donut sculpture, and then I move it around the house to different places. And I enjoy it.
I'm hungry. I got distracted by donuts. I didn't have the segue, actually. So, where were we going? Oh, Peter, is this how... This is the part you don't know about this podcast. I get to edit moments like this out. You don't have to hear these moments. From your side of the making and working with collectors, are there different relationships that happen? One of the other questions also submitted that I kind of connect with this is, I would imagine we're all humans. Things don't go perfectly all the time. Have you learned anything with working with collectors of what works, what doesn't work, when things are getting started, red flags you look out for, anything of that nature?
Well, does the check cash? That's one red flag, but...
How quickly it gets mailed.
Right. Well, that does actually bring up an interesting point. So I unfortunately did not honor a collector's relationship with a spirit that I since have learned to do with Louise. And that was, there was a well-known collector in Lancaster. His name was Bob Fennenbecker, and I'm sure many of you, that name is familiar. But Bob was an attorney in Lancaster, and on his property he had these 3 A-frames. And he didn't collect just ceramics, but he certainly had a lot of ceramics. And Bob would make the circuit of graduate shows. And he was always famous for, buying work and then sending you in a legal pad piece of paper, just folded up, $50 a month until he had exhausted the balance. And that was like really important to get $50 a month on a regular basis. But Bob always stayed in touch. Literally, you would get this piece of paper and just, how are you, would be scribbled on it. But I didn't nurture that relationship, and it was totally on me that I didn't. I was at a point in my career where everything I made went to an exhibition, and I only wanted him to have the best. And so I would always talk myself out of sending him work. And so in retrospect, I wish that I would have sent him work, even though I didn't think it was my best, because it was certainly, in retrospect, good enough. And with Louise, I make sure that Louise sees virtually everything. And Louise's collection of my work really, there's also some bad ideas in there that never go out, unfortunately, but they're in a photograph. But and that's something that, you know, I have a really trusting relationship with Louise, with her eye, and we have conversations. And yeah, Louise was just in my studio a few weeks ago, and I showed her some very new work that I have going on, and she gave me a real honest opinion. And so I value that. I value that a great deal. And we are fortunate that we do get to see each other physically a few times, at least a few times a year. And so that helps. Whereas with Bob, it was always images.
With most artist-collector relationships, I know the two of you have become friends, obviously, over many years. Do you feel like that is normal for artists and collectors, or is it more common in the field to have, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a more transactional relationship, a more distant relationship? Obviously, with galleries, you have a third party in the middle. I'm basically wondering if you two are special. Obviously you are.
We're
But
special.
Yeah. No, but if I might, and this might have to get beeped, Ben, so I'm going to quote. So I had a professor in graduate school. His name was Tony Hepburn. And he point blankly said one time, "No one wants to use the work of an asshole." And I was like, And so that whole thing about also collecting the person, you might really like the object, but if you've had a negative experience with that individual, it certainly is going to affect the way you look at that object. And so, you know, that really resonated. And of course, I've taken that to my own interpretation over the years. But I genuinely like the collectors I meet who collect my work. And I find them to be really interesting individuals. And when I do get a chance to see them, it's always a welcomed conversation. And they remind me of what pieces they have and when or where they got them. And so I rather enjoy that relationship. But I can't imagine having somebody who I just didn't like them as people having the work. And fortunately, that hasn't been my experience.
I'm trying to think if I've collected work from somebody and then discovered that I thought they were insufficiently nice.
Tony
use that
did
phrase.
use that language.
I'm going to use that phrase. I like that phrase. Well, speaking of other collectors, where do you feel like you have connected with people? Because my brain is going to my experience in other industries in that they were very, well, once you were in, then you got the introductions, you knew somebody, you could get into, you could get into the country club or whatever. And so it's hard, I think, for a lot of us just starting out to, where do I start? Where do I show up to even introduce myself? Or if I find someone's email online, is it okay if I send an email and say, "I love your collection. I'd love," the human way to approach each other on either side of the table, collector or artist, to get going if you're trying to get started?
Lately, since I have been trying to make the Rosenfield collection, really stand out and make more people aware of it, I have received emails from people saying, hey, I don't have a piece in your collection and you should have some of my work. And, for anybody who sends me that contact, I always write back and I always ask to see photographs or find out more about them, where they are in some, and mostly I get a piece on trial, and I mean like my trial, I pay for it and then I get it and I see what I think about it. And sometimes I really don't like them, but I have lots of people around me who are happy. It's like, it's all personal, right? I mean, if I don't like something, that doesn't mean that my next door neighbor is not going to just think it's the best thing ever. So I always have gifts.
I think, right here at NCECA, where you try as a maker, you try to get somewhere into 1, 2, 3 exhibitions, whether they're juried or your friends are doing it, so that the work is actually out in the public. Now, I know obviously with social media as it is, work does get out there, but there's no, substituting the actual physicalness of an object and in your presence. And that is, I think, the best way, because many of you out there probably have a decent size collection, and this is a fantastic place for these 4 days to see what is really being made, and that's where it starts. And I think that's we're very fortunate in this field to have something which is a nucleus of activity like NCECA, not only for the artists, but for educators and everybody else. It kind of goes without saying.
NCECA has been my primary location to see new artists, work of new artists. You just go to all the shows and see everything and, get new ideas. And I'm shocked, absolutely shocked, because I feel like I'm full. I go here and then we'll travel somewhere, and wherever we end up, I'm always looking to see what the local pottery scene is. And then I'll find 50 or 60 more people who make work, and they've never come to NCECA, they've never been in a show, they've never, they just do their own thing wherever they are. And so that's been really shocking to realize how many of us there are out there. Yeah. Recently, we were in Key West, Florida. There are, just on the drag, several pottery studios just with many artists just in the stores. And it's not consignment. These are people who have videos about their making, and they're on social media, and their work is there. And, never seen it anywhere. They just decided to live in Florida and open up a store and get it. It's in a tourist place, so they can make some work for tourists, and it works.
Yeah.
It's a different model.
What I hear in that is that so many of us are focused on online, on growing followers, on building an account, on having this stuff virtually. But when it comes down to it, how someone actually gets started is something like this, something in person, something, whether it be a conference or whether it be chatting with a local store down the street so that they have a piece of yours. So when someone comes in, they find that, or, opening a shop might be a bit of a commitment, but, you could also do that. Like, at least I get caught up in the internet and forget that actually the easiest way to maybe start something and have an impact is to connect with humans in person.
And also, for those starting out, really try to identify who your mentors are and stay close to them. And, through communication, and let them know what you're doing. And I mean, when I used to be the coordinator of utilitarian clay, we always had with that exhibition, like artists invite artists, and we would tell the artists who were participating to invite somebody who did not have a national audience. Somebody who they knew were making great pots, but maybe no one else knew. This was pre-Instagram. But it was always luminous to see who they would ask, and that's where I learned a lot about potters through something like that. And, that's happening too with the pottery tours now. Like Louise hasn't mentioned, but Louise and Brooks Oliver in the audience, and my wife Liz Lurie and Amy Helko, they started the Dallas Pottery Invitational, and they have a core group of artists, but they invite artists to come, and it's really a fantastic event, and it's, again, exposure to new people that way.
Our idea with the Dallas Pottery Invitational is it's in Dallas, and right now Dallas has grown to, the Metroplex has like 8 million people in it, and you would think there'd be a lot of people who need a lot of pottery, and there's, Texans and other Dallas people in this audience who know that Dallas is basically a functional clay desert. There are no galleries that, feature and or support this kind of work. So once a year we have this event, and, yes, the local pottery community does come out and support us, but the main thing is to get those other people who, they haven't ever had a handmade mug, or they haven't ever, taken a vase that was made by an artist and, had their own collaboration with it, with flowers. They haven't discovered how life-changing a moment that can be. And so we're still trying.
Well, correct. And just to let everybody know, Louise she exhibits at the Dallas Pottery Invitational. So she's a maker, and so she always has a presence there as a maker. But also, I have to, lots of people don't know that Louise, it was actually only women involved with making this large train kiln. And so Louise was right in there making this train kiln and, doing the midnight shift, on, and still is being fired to this day. So that's kind of an unusual part of Louise as a collector, is that she has a really intimate knowledge of materials. In fact, she taught raw materials infinitely better than I did. You were super well organized, so it works on the granular level as well.
I gave all my notebooks and stuff to Brooks when he started teaching. He doesn't need them now.
Well, I have one more question. I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to ask one more question, but this is your warning that after this question, Ben will start running mics. So if you haven't already got the questions turning or want to mentally prepare yourself to have to put your mouth in front of a microphone, now's your chance. But with your mention of that struggle with functionality, are there other places that, I mean, this is the newbie question, so forgive my, I don't know, dumbness, but are there other galleries or collections or places that we all should be aware of that is helping make the functional potter a little bit more known or easier to get into than trying to make something for a gallery with a capital G art for those of us that love our utilitarian wares?
There used to be a place in Dallas, these two guys just would invite people to send them stuff on consignment. But, one of them died and the other one was like, yeah, this is no fun. and they just closed it down. It drives me crazy. I think that I feel sad every time I walk into a gallery or walk into a place and the gallerist has all this stuff on consignment. Like, I understand that model needs to exist to have more stores, more storefronts. But I feel sad that the model relies on the artist to just keep sending work, and it may not sell. And then suddenly they have, I don't know, they could have hundreds of pieces all coming back to them at one point, and they live in a rural location where they have no possibility of having a community to come out and even give it away to.
I would venture to guess that the people in the audience could answer that question probably better than I can. But I feel, with gee whiz, so many states now have these pottery tours that are just fantastic. And I really think supporting those, see who is invited, look at the work, and get to know those individuals. And again, that one-on-one contact, I think, is invaluable. And, they're not impossible to start either. But to be in the position of eventually getting invited, the best way is to be seen. And that's really, really important.
Perfect. All right, no pressure, y'all. We're under the stage lights, so it's a lot easier to ask a question in the dark. Please say your name first, too.
Hi, I'm Lisa Westheimer, and I'm old enough to know the model of where you got a rep who took your stuff around or a gallery who represented you. And I'm not genetically programmed for selling online myself. I'm not good at it. It makes me miserable. Is this coming back, do you think, into our consciousness, this model? Or is it a hybrid of between the two, selling online and being in a gallery? It's some question.
A lot of gallerists sell online. I mean, last year, I'd say in 2023, I bought a lot of work from online galleries. I mean, galleries, they probably have storefronts, but I've never visited the storefront. I've only purchased online. And the sad thing about it is it's buying from a photograph. And so if it's somebody whose work you don't know if you can trust that it's going to be what you're expecting. And I heard an art professional speak and lecture students to just be scrappy and get together and, rent an office and have a pop-up and invite everybody and just get people in your community used to somehow coming to an event and maybe they know it's going to be, it's the third Friday. Let's go over to the barn where they're going to have work and a good band. And that is an excellent way for the artist to not only promote their work, but also to promote the building of a community that will support other artists. And I know lots of artists just want to make work and they're not into all this organization stuff, but maybe they have a friend who would help.
There might be somebody that teaches photography to make it easier for you, just hypothetically.
Well, I think just to pick up on that thread, I think it's really, really important to that whole thing of being seen and being a part of the community. We do have a tendency as clay artists, whether we put up a wall or however it gets put up between the other arts and clay. The bottom line is, you live in a city, you just support the arts, period. And if it's a painting show, if it's a performance, you just show up and get to know these individuals, and then they get to know you, and when they get to know you, they're interested in what you do. And when they become interested in what you do, they visit you, and then you become a part of their conversation, and whether they're a painter, printmaker, or whatever. And it's not about trying to draw a distinction between these materials. It's about coming together as people. And that always is a successful bridge to being a part of the community.
I had a mentor tell me once that if everybody who knows you doesn't know that you do what you do, or rather, I guess they said, everyone who knows you should know what you do, right? In that sense, what you create, what you make, because that's your first route of word of mouth, and then it just keeps going. But.
And to that point, and I know might be somewhat of a cliche, but there's that thing you often learn in graduate school, quote, the elevator pitch. There's a lot of truth to that. For one is that you never know when you're going to walk into the elevator. There's not a warning sign like you're going to have to talk about your work in 30 seconds. But you should be ready in 20 to 30 seconds to tell somebody what you do in a way that makes them interested. And that's just kind of part of your job as being an artist. Everyone does that online, of course, but again, in this one-to-one relationship, it's really, really important to be prepared.
All right. Hi, my name is Garth, and I have 3 maybe fun, concrete questions to ask. Number 1, what is the name of this miraculous cafe that's opening at the Everson Museum?
Why do I get the feeling you know the answers to some of these questions?
Cafe Louise. Next question.
Aren't you afraid that these pots are going to get broken being used in a cafe for food service?
Yes, I expect that they will be broken. That's going to be the most fun the people, if you break the pot in front of all these people and it's in a museum, you're going to feel terrible. There should be.
There should be a prize.
I haven't talked the museum into it, but I wanted them to put up these kind of thick plexiglass walls with slots in the top where you could just drop the shards in, and then as all the pots broken, the shards would fill up these. I haven't talked him into that yet. But I think it would be a great idea.
Just as long as you clean the shards first.
Find the museum's email address, y'all, and start throwing this suggestion there.
A little bird tells me that it may also be possible for some broken and cracked pots to become a really cool study collection. The third question is, how are the public going to know whose pots that they're eating off of?
I should have mentioned this. Some genius at the Everson Museum figured out this technique where genius Garth Johnson figured out this little
different
technique.
Garth, clearly a different Garth, and it's just a coincidence.
There are going to be these little tags glued permanently affixed to each of the pots that you'll be able to scan with your phone, so that while you're eating, it'll pop up who the artist is and some information about it, and then maybe you'll be able to look at the artist yourself. It's going to be really cool.
I know Maya's got a question, but can I just say, can we figure out a way to normalize for all of the people buying all of our pots, breaking pots? Because my God, people are scared about it. And I get they're spending a lot of money, but that's part of the beauty. It's gone.
I have a philosophy about this. I have several vessels in my collection that I paid over $1,000 for. And the idea is if it's too precious to use, then it's not doing its job. It's a functional object. So if I'm too worried I'm going to, drop it and break it, I think the idea is I should have more than one. So in case something happens to that one, I still have a spare.
I might quote you on our caraterra.com ceramics website where you can buy all your utilitarian functional wear. Go on.
I had a question about, it's kind of piggybacking on, I'm not really sure how I'm going to phrase this, but galleries and representation and things like that. And it's not really my world that I'm in, so I'm really interested to hear from you both about galleries that do work still in that kind of old school way, that they want to represent you, but have really strict parameters on where you can sell and where you can't sell. And even if you sell it on your own, they still want to take a cut when they find out about it. And just your thoughts, because it's just such a world that I'm not in. So I know that there's still a lot of people that do operate like that. And, why? And I'd like to just hear your thoughts on that. You can take it in any direction.
Go ahead. You know more about it.
Well, gee whiz, my thoughts. Certainly, how you decide to put your work out there is obviously very personal, and for me, I've never had that sort of ownership relationship with a gallery. So it hasn't really been an issue, but I am cognizant of these things are at the art stream, so I'm certainly not going to send them, for a different price at another place, so I'm aware of things in that way. But in terms of the strict, we have everything west of the Mississippi or something like that, I've never encountered that. And typically when I've worked with galleries, it's for an exhibition and so forth, and then, some relationship, but not a hard, fast, they, quote, represent me. So I guess I'm not really equipped to answer that in a definitive way.
I'm aware of that, and I have gotten myself in trouble not just suggesting, making introductions to people who... here's the other thing. It's hard enough for the artist, but lots of artists are not interested in marketing. They can't do it. They don't want to do it. That's not why they're making stuff. That's not why they're an artist. So if they can turn it over to a gallerist who will do all that marketing and put you out there, and then if the gallerist is lucky and you get to be famous, and the gallerist then is going to be your marketing person and doesn't want anybody going behind the gallerist's back to undercut a sale. So you can understand the reason for that. And before I came to understand how that worked, and it seemed kind of unfair to me, somebody wanted to buy work cheaper than the gallery was selling it. And I said, well, why don't you just get it from the artist direct? And then I introduced somebody, and then the artist was horrified because I had made that introduction. And, they wouldn't cross their gallerist in 100 million years. That would be really horrible. And then the person who wanted to buy the work but didn't want to pay for it was really angry and mad at the artist and mad at the gallerist. And, I am not a fan of collectors who want a deal. They're not going to buy your work unless they get a deal. Maybe that's not somebody you want to have your work.
I saw Nicole first, and then I saw also Nicole. Wow, that was weird. And then I saw a person who I don't know their name, so just helping Ben out. That's hilarious, though.
Hi, Nicole Bernard, also from Dallas. And so first, I'd like to say thank you for the Dallas Pottery Invitational, because it's a highlight of my year and the highlight of a lot of folks in the Dallas community. So I know that building a collection is very personal, but I loved what Peter said about collecting people, collecting their stories, and as somebody who's a storyteller as well, I think about that a lot. So I'm curious as to how variety or maybe even equity comes into your decisions about what pieces you're collecting, and then also maybe the people that you're adding into your collection.
I would say that I'm moderately aware of equity issues. I mean, so many times I'm buying something from a photograph online, so I don't always know who the maker is. And I have to say that as the pottery community in general has become more equitable, I'm having a lot more opportunity to make those kinds of decisions. I mean, you know, back in the day, there were like Kevin Snipes. So I think that's more interesting.
So yeah, my name's Nicole, but most people know me as Nico. A question for you, because I realized, well, actually, my professor realized that I started becoming a collector when she pointed it out to me, and I thought, no, I just have a couple pots, and then I realized she's right. But, you know, a lot of times, like you said, you're purchasing from a picture. So these galleries, right, that we rely on and trust, I have received pieces that have been under par from these galleries, and then there's this guilt of like, are you just supposed to keep this piece because it's got a sharp edge or something's broken or whatever? Or do you contact the gallery and kind of say like, hey, this didn't meet the expectations? And is it taboo to like send it back? I hate to say it, but I've done it. So I'm just curious. And even some famous artists who have sent work that has had lots of issues before and having to send that back and being made guilty for sending something with cracks in it. So just curious.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I've done both those things, but here's something that I think is a good idea that I have also done, and that is contact the artist and say, you know, like, do you know that the gallery, that you sent work to the gallery that had pinholes in the glaze? Did you mean to do that? And, you know, or because that informs you about that person's work. And if they say, oh yeah, a few pinholes don't really bother me, which, you know, for some people that is true. It's not part of their work. It's whatever. But that's going to make a big difference into how you behave with your purchases in the future. And I would also suggest to everybody, do a basic documentation of everything in your house. Take a picture, print it out, stick it on a notebook paper or whatever, who the artist is, when you got it, what you paid for it, and where you got it if you remember. Because that information for anybody who's going to be going through your stuff at any time, or if you have a fire, or if, you know, whatever happens, you'll have this documentation that's going to be very important.
I'm Ellison Goodwin. I'm from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I keep a recipe box with little cards of my pieces that I've collected exactly like that. I started doing that a while ago when I worked for a gallery and made no money because I spent it all in the gallery. As an artist with a collection, I own some pieces that do not have a maker's mark, but I know that I bought it from the artist. Other people can look at it and tell it's Ron Myers, but it doesn't say, it's not signed. How do you, as a collector, establish some element of provenance so that, say, a collection might want that piece for a retrospective or something like that, where you can prove, yeah, this is legit and authentic? There's not a lot of that, to my knowledge, with modern ceramics versus like something that came out of an archaeological dig.
I have 3 suggestions about that. First, and Ron Myers, I took one elective in college, and he was my teacher, and I think it was the first year he was a teacher in a college, so that was fun. When you bought it, if you happen to take a picture together, or if you write to him and say, do you remember making this? And then you have something to document that it was yours. And also there are curators, well, there's the Marks Project, and you can encourage the person to have a page on the Marks Project. And then there are curators who you can contact, especially at the Everson, who can fill in some blanks for you.
Thank you.
I know. You have such an eager hand, and I apologize to pick favorites, but I'm going to go one more, and then Ben's going to kill me. So I hope it's a short question, but it's okay.
It's really a comment because I'm from Dallas, Texas, and know Louise and Peter very well. And Louise and Liz put together the DPI, the Dallas Pottery Invitational, and it is the gift, an unbelievable gift to the city because it was a desert for functional work. And so I want to recognize that. But I also want to add about the promotional work that she does to make sure that the public gets out to see it, because it's on the radio, it's in the newspaper, it's everywhere. And she brings in people from the community to a florist that will put flowers for free in the vases at the DPI, at the event. She brings in coffee makers that make coffee for your mugs. It's an event. And the Friday night is like an opening. And it's much more than just, it's truly an event in music, and it's amazing. She's one of a kind. She and Liz have put together something very special, and I just want to acknowledge that person.
Thank you. Well, I think that was a perfect wrap-up. I'm going to do one thing that I failed to do if you were in the room yesterday, and say on the record that if you want more conversations like this, the best place to come is makersplaybook.com/podcast. It's part of the Brickyard Network now, which Ben Carter puts a crap ton of his work into to bring to all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we finish up today's episode, I want to pull out just a couple of themes that I heard while I was chatting and listening again to this conversation with Peter and Louise, and just make them a little bit more, well, obvious, in case you were half listening in the studio. Hypothetically, I'm sure. While their maker-collector experience happened in a bit of an accident, and obviously gradually over time, it also happened because they both showed up to the same room one day and happened to meet in person, even if it happened accidentally. And while so much of what I do is online, and I think probably a lot of what you potentially are trying to do is online, we're sitting over here trying to learn how to game an algorithm in order to show up to the right people in a digital room of the intranet. This conversation reminded me that oftentimes the easiest way to grow our small businesses or pursue our goals is to actually show up in real life, to the rooms we think that perhaps the people we're interested in connecting with and meeting might be hanging out. Now, I know those aren't always local to you, but maybe potentially there is a local gallery that's having an opening for a new show. Or maybe there's museum events at a museum that's perhaps only an hour away that you could get to. Events on a nearby college campus where collectors and brand new student creators might merge together into one space, and you can be a part of that conversation as well. Or heck, as was even mentioned in this conversation, make your own version of an event if you can't seem to find any near you. Sure, that's a lot of work, but honestly, it's kind of a bit more fun than staring at a screen, right? However, one cannot talk about showing up in person without acknowledging the disparity of resources often found for things like this. Even my simply traveling to NCECA, well, let me back up. It wasn't so simple. I took a domestic flight from Wisconsin to Virginia. I needed to stay in a hotel or an Airbnb. And then there's all other kind of daily expenses that add up really quickly. Which means, more often than not, these rooms are filled with a very limited segment of the arts community and don't always reflect the beautiful tapestry of diverse artists out there making amazing new work. It's our responsibility to ourselves and our own small business goals to put ourselves in these rooms. But it's also our responsibility, if we are someone with access to these rooms already, to invite a friend along who maybe didn't get the invitation or who maybe didn't see the Instagram announcement to come to a show. It seems to me that building relationships with collectors is highly dependent upon word of mouth. And having built a couple of businesses solely on word of mouth, I know that it's all about knowing someone who knows someone who then mentions your name to someone, even if you actually aren't in the room. If we aren't careful, that can quickly become a broken record of a small clique of people, kind of like the cool kids in high school, of which I most definitely was not one. We all need to make sure that if it's our turn to put that record on, we switch up the musical genre every once in a while. Ignoring my mixed metaphors here, honestly, it's just a heck of a lot easier to show up somewhere for ourselves and our own business goals if we bring a friend with us to walk through the door together. After all, it's together that we make this crazy dream of making a living from the things we make actually work. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield collection of functional ceramic art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of the Maker's Playbook. The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray Epoxy, a 2-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray Epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, with a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.